Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 874. I started off with e4 here. My opponent went e6, the French defense. I continue, and he continues in normal main line here. I go knight to c3, a top choice, and just puts more pressure on the center. I think it's a pretty logical developing move. Black can counter this with bishop to b4, leading to the win-hour variation, or a knight to f6, which is the classical French defense. Yeah, black can also take. I think that's the Rubinstein French. But anyway, he didn't do any of that. He played c5, and this is the Marshall Gambit. It's actually called the Marshall Gambit of the Sicilian defense. I suppose you could imagine this was a Sicilian where black's first move was to play c5, the second move was e6, and the third move was d5, so you get to it by that kind of move order. But white, to get this position, would have had to play a knight c3 Sicilian, which is not normal. The normal Sicilian move is knight to f3, and that's the way I play it. So in my own experience, and I think in general, this gambit is most often seen in the French defense, and that's the only way I see it, because I don't play this knight c3 move in a Sicilian. And it's not a particularly good gambit, although I did look up the history of it, and Frank Marshall did play this several times and had a decent record with it against some of the top players of his day. So it just shows what a strong tactical player he was if he could get away with playing something like this. But this really should lose a pawn. Let's see. Yeah, I was talking about it during the game. I wasn't sure if it actually did lose a pawn, but I think it really does. And I don't think black has enough compensation. So he takes. And then, well, an important finesse here is to throw in the move bishop to b5. And let's just follow it here on the notation page. I worked this out with the help of the chess engine. You throw in this check, knight to c6, and then you take the pawn. And if he tries this d4 trick, instead of moving the knight right away, you throw in queen to e2 check, and then knight to e4. And notice the queen on e2 is defending the bishop. So, you know, black's queen can come out and give a check, but because the bishop is defended, that check can just be blocked, and everything is okay, and white stays a pawn up. So that's the most accurate way to play it. But actually the way I played it is fine as well, and keeps a big advantage for white. Basically in this line, I have the advantage of the bishop pair. And you can see once again we're outside the opening book. Well, it just stopped at that point. Let's see if oh yeah, I wanted to mention, in my own experience, players often forget the line and forget to play that d4 move. I think that's the only way to try and get something out of this gambit. Try and make your opponent's position a bit awkward by pushing that pawn forward. But in practice, I most often see bishop takes, in which case you just grab that center pawn and you're a pawn up for basically nothing. I mean, there's no advantage in development for black. It's basically just an equal position, except black is a pawn down. Anyway, he didn't play that way. He played a more interesting way. He went with d4. So I went knight e4 here. This was still, like I said, it's still quite an advantage for white. Even after he gets the pawn back, you'll see that he has this little trick to get the pawn back. Now the check wins that knight, so he didn't lose the bishop. He just won a pawn. But he gave up the bishop pair, and I have an edge in development. So the chess engine still rates this as about 1 pawn advantage for white. So everything is fine here. I do some kind of quiet developing moves here, which are probably okay, maybe not absolutely best, but still keeping an advantage. I block here, and then he went knight e2. And here's, I miss a trick. And this is starting at this point, that the trick is actually available from here and for the next several moves. But this is the best place to show it. Well, it's the first time it appears. I can just grab this pawn now. It means I have to give up the bishop pair, but it's a typical kind of trick where if he tries to throw in this intermediate move of bishop takes, threatening my queen, you just take back with the knight. So I've got the I've got that extra pawn now, and I don't have the bishop pair anymore, but I am just a pawn up. It seems like black does not have much of a lead in development. You know, he's got a dominating queen, but I don't think that's going to last. I should be able to kick that around. Anyway, I think this is good for white, just being a pawn up. And of course, if he takes the knight, then you take the bishop. You know, he could grab the b pawn here, I guess, but you can kick the queen with the rook and grab a pawn down here. In this line, white keeps the bishop pair. Maybe he gets a pawn back here, but anyway, this is also good for white. So that would have been a nice little trick to just grab that pawn. Castling, though, keeps an advantage. Well, we'll get to the point where I give the advantage away, so I'll show that. h3 is okay here. The chess engine actually would throw in the move b4 and kick the queen back and then play h3. You know, I was wondering about that. I played a3 later, and I had the possibility of playing b4 at various times. But I was never sure. I mean, you push the pawn forward like that, your c pawn is always going to be backwards, or at least for quite a while. So I wasn't quite sure what big advantage was gained by that. Anyway, I just went ahead and kicked the bishop right away. He dropped back, went a3 here. I had spotted this idea of parking a bishop on this square and taking advantage of the lineup of pieces on that diagonal. But his next move, which is a logical developing move, knight b to c6, puts an end to that. So maybe that was just kind of a wasted tempo there. Let's see, I went rook c1 here. Rook e1 is slightly preferable. He goes rook f to d8, supporting this pawn. And now I just went knight e1 to kind of resolve the tension over here. And at that point, it's pretty much equal. So I could still keep an advantage with moves that you know, I showed earlier, like the b4 move. That's the chess engine likes that a lot still, or rook to e1. But knight to e1, yeah, it's pretty much even after this. So he takes, I take, plays knight g6, you know, knight d3. So I thought that was a good blockading square for the knight, and maybe I'd put pressure on the pawn later. It's still going to be a weakness, so you know, I probably still have some edge here. But well, he's got active pieces, so it's okay for black as well. And then c3 is just a blunder. So we went from I was better to things are in the range of even to now I'm just worse. I just was forgetting that you know, this lineup of pieces here is going to be a problem when I undefend that knight. And let's see, he could exploit this. Well, let's back up first. Instead of c3, rook c to e1 is the recommended move, and say rook a to c8, bishop back to c1. Yeah, I mean, the chess engine here was not finding any big active plan, but it did think that pushing forward on the king side was a possibility here with f4. So that's an alternative idea here besides what I was trying to do, just get rid of this pawn. So yeah, this is just bad for me. He played rook e8. He could have maybe done even better with this move. If he takes right away, I have to take with the rook. I'd already noticed that. This knight is doubly attacked. That was what I had kind of I had failed to appreciate, that double attack there, because I was thinking it's defended by my queen. But it was not a sufficient defense since it was attacked twice. Anyway, he can start harassing me once I have to defend in this awkward kind of way. So like knight d4, hitting my queen, say queen e3, the other knight. Oh, and then the knight can go to b5, hitting my rook. And now I still have to try and keep hold of my knight. Queen d5, lining up like this. Now if the knight moves, the bishop is hanging. Let's see. And then there's this funny move, knight to c1, because if he takes the bishop, I can take his knight. So it's not actually hanging just yet. And knight d4, hitting my rook again, and rook to c3. So I don't know. This is a kind of position where white is just calling all the shots, and my pieces have been shoved back. I haven't actually lost any material yet, but probably at some point I will. Anyway, that's best play. He went rook e8, which is also a good move because my queen needs to stay in touch with the knight here. It's got to continue to defend the knight, and so it doesn't have many squares it can go to. So queen to f3 is the only move here, and then he can trade off queens and mess up my pawns here. And this should also be winning with if he were to play this move knight to h4, because my king can't come in to defend that pawn. And yeah, I don't know. Do I really want to play a move like knight e1 to hold on to it? It's a pretty tough position for me, and he basically just picks up a pawn there. So that's the way for him to get a winning edge too. Instead, he takes here, and this is not so clear. I mean, black is better, but yeah, the game is still in the balance here. It activated my bishop, and the bishop is a good piece. The weakness of these pawns is not going to be such a big problem as we get into the endgame. Didn't mean to do that. It's not going to be such a big problem as we get into the endgame because my king can defend over here. So I think this is still all right for white, although black is better. Anyway, he goes rook e2. I play knight to c5. And he kicks the knight with b6. Knight c to e5 is a little more accurate. So that works like this. Knight to e5. He's going after this pawn again. He's going to go for this knight h4 move and double up on that pawn. It's going to be hard for me to defend it. So, for example, if I were to play king h2, this knight comes in with check and he wins that pawn. So I have to take. He takes, and then king g2, and then the rook can grab over here on b2. And so he's a pawn up here. And yeah, this is pretty good for black. So I guess yeah, maybe I was optimistic to say I was still in the game here. He could probably still win with careful play, but maybe it's after this move b6 I finally kind of find my feet in the position. Let's see, I went with knight to e4. He played knight to f4. Bring my king to h2. Want to get into position to maybe come out here and hold on to these pawns. He played f5, kicking my knight. Not that move. f5, kicking my knight. Knight drop back to g3. And now I'm actually starting to get a little bit better. This pawn is hanging, his rook is hanging, and it's not many good squares for the rook. He has to drop back to e6. The bishop was covering this square, and I can pick up a pawn here. The chess engine thinks actually, though, that black is still okay here. It seems like the momentum has shifted, but it wasn't until this knight e2 move that white was actually better again. And that's because he just walks into this pin. So pretty much any move other than knight e2 would keep the game in the balance, even though I did manage to snag a pawn. I guess my remaining pawns are not so impressive. Anyway, he played knight e2. I went rook c to e1, pinning it. And let's see, he played g6, kicking my knight. That's all good. Go knight g3. And now he decided to take. And at that point, the advantage shifts to me. Best is to defend the knight like this. I can trade, and then he takes back, and notice the knight from this square defends the rook. So I mean, I can keep trading and go into this endgame and try and prove that my extra pawn is worth something. And I have an active rook, so I'm a little better in this endgame, but maybe not so easily winning. But when he plays knight takes g3, now it's the situation has completely changed. He straightened out my pawns, and I just have a clean extra pawn, and I have this bishop, which is a better piece than his knight on this open board. So the situation has changed once again, and white is winning. And I keep this edge for quite a while. So let's just go through the next moves. This was kind of a long game, so I don't have time to comment on everything. But he played this, I mean, both sides played this reasonably well, but white's advantage is slowly building as it does in an endgame where you have an advantage. It just seems to naturally increase over time. And, you know, I have an extra pawn that I can slowly push forward, and I have active pieces. So that's what's happening. This b4 move was maybe a mistake. I mean, I have to be careful that he doesn't kick my bishop out of the way and, you know, be able to bring his rook in with check and pick up the b pawn if my bishop is no longer defending it. but he can't defend his b pawn. So when I come over here, I'm actually picking up another pawn. He pushed on anyway. It's probably as good a thing to do as any, because well, now at least he can get his pieces active. He goes knight to d4, and now the rook can come down here with the check and pick up a pawn. So I drop back. I drop the bishop back to defend once again. He goes to f5. I start kicking it around. This is all still winning for white. The next critical point is coming up here. Yeah, it's actually this move f5. I really should have thought before playing that move. Technically speaking, it's not giving the game away just yet, but it's a step in the wrong direction. So I guess what I have to say about this position is I should really have thought about it and prepared that move a little better. Now it turns out after f5 and he takes, I don't have to take back. I could actually play g5, and this is still winning for white because I have the threat of this pawn queening as well as this pawn. So it's still an easy win at this point, but I really should have thought of that before even pushing that pawn to f5. Anyway, like I said, I didn't think, and I even took back here. And at this point, it's actually a draw. I just have a one-pawn advantage, and it's way back here. And his pieces are reasonably well positioned. He can bring his king out over closer to in front of the pawn, and there's just no way for me to actually win this. Yeah, let's go forward in the game once again. He keeps this draw in hand. Maybe not playing all the best moves, but it's still drawing. And after a series of checks, he goes in for this rook and pawn endgame. And this should be a drawn rook and pawn endgame. One thing I wanted to mention here is I have a chess basics video about how to draw endgames like this, and also when they're winning, how to win them. So I will put links to those two videos in the end screen of this video if you guys are interested. Anyway, this is still this rook and pawn endgame is a pretty easy draw actually for black, and he once again keeps the draw in hand. And this is the next critical point. So right here, I have this problem where I want to keep his king cut off with my rook, and I want to move my pawn forward, and I need the help of my king to do that. So that means my king is going to have to cross over the d file here at some point. And when that does, and here's the opportunity, black can force a trade. If my king had been in front, it would have been with a check. But even here, it forces a trade because this is pinned. I can't move my rook away. And after the trade, his king is in time to stop the pawn. So that's an easy draw at this point. Let's see. So the losing move of the game is actually this next move. He played king e7, and then my king crosses over that critical line, and now it's a pretty simple win. So we'll just go through the rest of the way. He checks me, but basically there's no way that he can stop me from pushing that pawn forward and get it all the way to the second rank, and then my king walks around behind the pawn, and it's going to promote at this point. And yeah, the videos I mentioned, they talk about how you can force a win in all cases as long as you have the black king cut off. You just need to cut him off actually on this file is good enough, and you can get a win. Anyway, if you are interested in those videos, I'll have links for you. And that's how this game ended. He decided to resign at this point because I'm going to queen, and also his rook is under attack and has to move away. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.